Yes, people, I'm Srini and you're watching More Than a Game presents My Top 10, a show where we get the real tastemakers of sport and they talk to us about their top 10 favorite players of all time. I finally got there. And today we've got an absolute legend in the building. Well, not actually in the building because we're doing this over Zoom, but nonetheless, we've got an absolute legend who loves Sunderland as much as he loves the Adidas Sambas. To me, he says our Aspilicueta of football really because he's an absolute fan favorite. I mean, you just can't hate the guy. Let's not waste any more time because you know who it is. It's none other than Dougie Critchley. What's happening, my guy?
Oh, thanks very much, Srini. Love the intro. Yeah, it's great to be here. I mean, it's a bit of a bleak time in the UK right now, so I feel like I need a little chat about my 10 favourite footballers that will warm the soul a bit. So, yeah, thanks for having me on.
No, it's an absolute pleasure. And if anyone watches your content, they know how much you love the Adidas Sambas. To me, they're like the James Milner of sneakers. I mean, they're boring. They're boringly brilliant. So, yeah. So,
yeah, they are.
Yeah. So before we actually kick into the show, I wanted to ask you how 2020 as a whole was for you, because to me, 2020 was like an evil inside joke that none of us were in on. So it wasn't funny to us at all. So how was the whole year for you?
I mean, it was strange. I mean, it kicked off much as normal, like working hard, enjoying social life, seeing a lot of friends. I remember going on a stag do in sort of February time, and, life seemed pretty normal. Life seemed pretty good. And then March, coronavirus hits the UK. The government hadn't prepared for it one bit. We're all thrown into a lockdown. Our office was shut. So we were all working from home. We all, bought webcams. We bought these mics that I'm using today, and we just took production sort of from our homes, which we've been really appreciative of the amount of sort of love and support we've had from fans like yourself and many others through this difficult period, because we're doing the best we can, but it's difficult to make content that watchable over Zoom or over Google Hangouts is what we use or whatever. You need to bounce off people to make the best content possible. So it's been a bit of a challenge, but it looks like things are improving with sort of three vaccines now in production starting to be rolled out. So it looks like it's going to pick up this year, hopefully.
Yeah, I mean, when you read about like COVID in the UK and you read about all the new tiers that they keep coming up with, I mean, soon enough, you're just going to be relegated. Like you're like the Sheffield, like London's like the Sheffield United of cities, if you look at it. So it's kind of ridiculous. But yeah, we hope to see light at the end of the tunnel. But I wanted we could kick things off by talking about your top 10 favorite players of all time. Now, I'd like to give a disclaimer to everyone. Like, this isn't about Messi needs to be number one and this person needs to be number two. Like, Dougie's a Sunderland fan, so I assume Jack Rodwell is going to be number one instead of Srinivas Sadhanand, or Connor Wickham's going to be there instead of Rahul. No, I'm kidding. But it's his personal preference, and that's what the show is about. So, when you find different fans on the internet or just in general, their personal perspective is what makes this fun, because you constantly see the same people in your top 5 and in your top 3. So this is what makes the whole concept interesting. So wanted to give a little disclaimer out there. So Dougie, let's start with number 10. Who do you have at number 10?
Okay, as you say, mine, my top 10 has a list of players of different abilities, backgrounds, like how long they played for, who they played for, the caliber of player. But I've actually gone with quite a big dog for number 10. I've gone with Xabi Alonso. Wow. Always love Xabi Alonso. I feel like he had such an interesting career arc, made some great decisions at the right time, swapping Real Sociedad for Liverpool, then going to Real Madrid, Bayern Munich, won trophies wherever he went. The way that players who played with him talk about him, the likes of Steven Gerrard, Jamie Carragher, the way they talk about his passing range, his understanding of the game, his long range shooting as well. Always love a long range goal. And I just feel like he was probably, I really appreciate Sergio Busquets, but for me, Xabi Alonso is the better player and is the best sort of defensive midfielder of this last sort of 10, 15 years. And I absolutely love Xabi Alonso. Very cool guy. And he's in at number 10.
Yeah, I mean, Xabi Alonso, amazing midfielder, amazing beard. Of course. But yeah, Xabi Alonso is timeless. Personally, let me tell you something about Indian fans as a whole. Like, because our country isn't the greatest at football, and that isn't doing any discredit to them, of course. We're making progress. But we sort of pick our own like international teams, and we support them like we support like any personal team. Like I support City, but like I'm a massive Spain fan. So Xabi Alonso, to me personally, even though Andrea Pirlo is a better player, I personally like him so much because I've grown up watching Spain since like 2008. So in India, we tend to like take to these international teams because we support them. They're our own countries. So yeah, Xabi Alonso is an absolute legend. Do you think? See, of course, he's had a better career than N'Golo Kante because he's so decorated. But just ability-wise, who would you want in your midfield? Because Kante is more of a destroyer. He's more of like a deep-line playmaker. So if you had to pick, who would you pick?
Yeah, I suppose it depends who you're pairing them with as well. I think Xabi Alonso has probably got more of like ball playing ability than Kante. I think most people would probably agree with that. But Kante at his peak was sort of unheard of in terms of the amount of defensive work he got through. I mean, I was looking at it yesterday. I think he was like close to 10 tackles and interceptions in that title-winning season at Leicester. Unfortunately now, Kante probably has had a less long peak, if that makes sense. Like I think he had between about 2015 to 2018, he was really, really excellent. But I think he has slightly fallen off recently, and I think that's down to injuries, the amount of football he's played in the last 3 years, and it just feels like in a few games recently, I mean, being a City fan, you would have enjoyed their victory over Chelsea, and I thought Kante, it just really didn't look his best. And obviously he's been changed position a lot in that midfield, and I think he's suffering slightly from that. And also, as much as I like Mason Mount, he's probably not the most natural defensive-minded player, and Kovacic has maybe not had his best season compared to last year, so maybe he just needs a bit more support. So Kante, there's some question marks over him, but yeah, I think Xabi Alonso, definitely the better player.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with you fully. I think Kante, we're seeing a bit of a decline from him. Obviously, I still know that he has it in the tank. I mean, at the start of the season, I actually thought he was back to his best. But in the last few games, especially against Arsenal and City as well, it feels like he makes the wrong decisions all the time. Like, I constantly saw him fouling Saka all the time, giving them cheap free kicks against City as well. Like, the pass that he gave for De Bruyne's goal was comical. I mean, I didn't even celebrate that properly because it actually looked like if you added like Benny Hill music in the background, I think that was, that was what it was like. It was an absolute shambles. Of course, Arsenal fans would tell you that he's never been the same since the whole Martinelli thing, but that's not true.
Yeah.
But yeah.
He just looked out of position a lot against City as well. And it wasn't really, I didn't really get Chelsea's game plan for that first half. They just looked completely overwhelmed, and Kante really was off the pace. So yeah, big game, didn't perform in that, but doesn't mean he's not a great player. He's just going through a slightly dodgy period. Yeah,
of course, he's an absolute legend. Like, we've never seen defensive output like that. But moving on from Kante and Xabi Alonso, of course, absolutely brilliant midfielder. Who do you have at number 9?
My number 9 is a little bit niche, but as a Sunderland fan, in our sort of glory days, sort of glory days since I've been a proper fan. I mean, we were at the start of this century, I should clarify, we consistently finished about 7th, and that was really the glory days, to be honest. But I was only sort of 7, 8, so I don't really remember that as well. But the best period that I can remember was around 2010 under Steve Bruce, actually. And it was when we had Darren Bent up front, and I'd never really appreciated Darren Bent that much beforehand at Spurs or Charlton or Ipswich, and then he went to Sunderland, and there was a period where he was absolutely electric for Sunderland. I mean, he scored 20 league goals in a single season, which is pretty impressive for a side of Sunderland's calibre. And we had a great side back then. It was, him and Asamoah Gyan, Steve Malbronk, Jordan Henderson was breaking through as well. And Darren Bent was the sort of figurehead. Absolutely gutted when he left to go to join Aston Villa, who were around the same place as us in the table. Obviously, it then came off because they then had a little bump before declining quite drastically, and he actually fell out really badly with Paul Lambert at the end of his time at Aston Villa. But I thought Darren Bent, just for what he did for Sunderland for those 2-3 years, he just about makes this list, despite his slight betrayal at the end.
Yeah, I think Darren Bent doesn't get the credit he deserves. I've noticed that, like, whenever people, not me, but whenever people mention Darren Bent, they use it to like sort of ridicule another player. So they'll like call Lacazette the French Darren Bent, or like ridiculous things like that. And I think people sort of underappreciate players like Darren Bent, who is a very respectable, established Premier League striker. I mean, as you said, to score 25 goals for Sunderland is unheard of since like probably Kevin Phillips in like 99, 2000 or something like that. Yeah. So I think he scored 30 goals that season. I think he won the Golden Boot. So
European Golden Boot as well.
Yeah, exactly. So when you think of that, I think Darren Bent is a very respectable striker and a very niche choice, of course. You're not mentioning the likes of Jack Rodwell and players like that, because we've all seen the Sunderland Till I Die documentary. By the way, what do you make of that? Because to me it's painfully funny, that documentary. Like, what is it like for you?
Yeah, I think it's obviously it's quite painful viewing for a Sunderland fan. It's effectively how, particularly that championship year, particularly that Series 1, like it was how not to run a club at that time. And just to see, you'd always heard rumours about the amount of chaos going inside the club, and you sit in their scouting meetings and they're talking about signing Zlatan, and you're just like, where is the actual like football knowledge, the football now? It's just bare common sense, really. Yeah. So it's a really difficult documentary to watch for a Sunderland fan. At the same time, I enjoy it. Like, I've enjoyed it at the same time, because it's so interesting seeing that sort of access to your club, and it's raw, it's unfiltered. You see a lot of emotion. You see how inept some of these people that are managing Sunderland are. I mean, Stuart Donald, when he paid 4 times his original asking price for Will Grigg. You see Charlie Method, who's just a sort of meme by the end of the show. Even the guy year before, Bain or whatever, from who was at Rangers beforehand, who was sort of David Brent come to life. So it's an interesting documentary. I don't love it, and I'll never probably watch it again after watching it, just because it is painful. But at the same time, I kind of appreciate it as well. It's much better than the other. I've got to say, it's much better than the City Sporting, the documentary.
Wow.
Which is basically just an advert for their club, and it's just completely. You don't see any drama because it was such a good season, and I just didn't appreciate it nearly as much. I still need to watch the Leeds one. I've watched the Spurs one, which is excellent as well. But yeah, I do like the Sunderland one.
I didn't know you were going to throw shade like that, but fair enough. But no, I agree, to be fair. I think the City one is like very, I think they threw shade at like Mourinho at a point, and I cringed it, but like, you don't have to force the whole Pep Mourinho thing. We're not like in 2010 or whatever. Like, you really don't need to force that. With the Sunderland one, it was basically Netflix version of The Office. I mean, I was just going to say that. I mean, it was painful, but to be fair, it was very funny. And you get to be fair, it is painful because you get to see how much the fans actually love the club. The way the fans talk about how it is everything they live for. When you actually take that in, you do feel a little bad, even though it is absolutely hysterical for the most part. So
I think that's a very good point, to be honest. The amount, what makes that documentary is like Peter Farrer, the taxi driver, the other people that go, the fans that get interviewed before every match week, or that listening to the radio on a Saturday because they can't afford a television or to go to the games or whatever. Like Sunderland, the club is like the beating heart of that community, and it's a community that's gone through a lot of difficult times over the last 30-40 years, with a lot of the shipbuilding closing down. It used to have a big Nissan factory as well. There's a lot of unemployment, so it really is like a beacon of hope in an otherwise like quite difficult time for the area. Yeah,
and if you consider the fact that it's quite a small town, I mean, I recently saw a clip of Neil Warnock on Twitter talking about how like football, even though he admitted that he may pick the wrong teams, but the fact that like the fans have something to watch, especially during these times, is good enough. Like the fact that they have actually something to moan about is much better than actually not having anything at all. So when you consider all of that, it is painful, because you look at the fans and you look at the state of the club, and you also forget that Sunderland is a city with culture, and you tend to forget that because of the way the worldwide media sort of portray small cities like that. Because to outsiders, England is just London and tea and the Queen. That's it. So when you consider all of that, that documentary is, I'll admit, is better than the City documentary. But anyway,
we get it out in the end.
Yeah, of course. But to be fair, by the way, with the Spurs documentary, I wanted way more drama. But anyway, I don't think we actually got to see that, because in the teasers, I thought it was going to be like, he's going to be ridiculous. But Mourinho's actually way more even-keeled than I actually thought he was. So
yeah, they cut it quite well in terms of adding the drama for the trailers. But I thought it was interesting. I just wanted more. Obviously, you didn't want to give away too many tactics and the sort of inside the dressing room. But it was a little bland, the Spurs documentary, compared to what I thought it would be. But I still enjoyed it.
To me, it's like Sunderland till I die, the City documentary, and then the Spurs one. I'm not even gonna lie.
Really, I'd put Spurs narrowly ahead of City, just because they were, you saw some great moments where he'd, lambast like Serge Aurier, he'd have a go at Dele Alli, where I didn't really see that in the City documentary. But
yeah, that's true. But in the City doc, I do remember when like Pep was screaming on the training ground. He was like, "Oh, you're tired, f you, whatever." Like when you saw all of that, when you saw like that private conversation he had with Arteta, where he's like, Raheem was telling me about how, he feels really bad that he, missed the chances and didn't do what, we told him to do. Like, when you see those private conversations, or when I think he mentioned how he was actually scared of Mane, Salah and Firmino, because you don't really see managers like accepting that in public. Why would they?
Well, exactly.
Yeah, so it's also because I'm a City fan, let's be honest. Like, this is an advert for the documentary.
Yeah.
So yeah, but anyway, moving on from those documentaries to your actual number 8, who do you have?
This one's quite niche as well. I've gone back to the continent and I'm going with Alessandro Nesta.
Wow.
Absolutely loved him as a player when I was growing up. Always used to try and sign him on sort of Championship Manager, Football Manager, which is how I sort of got into football through Football Manager. And Nesta was an absolute boss. And he didn't really get the credit because he obviously played in a great Milan side and Lazio side before that. Alongside Maldini and Costa Curta for AC Milan, but I just thought he was a very cool guy. Never really looked that rattled, and his highlight packages now I just love watching. I think he just had it all, and part of a great Italian crop of defenders from sort of the late 90s to sort of 2006. They had some of the unreal defenders, and he was definitely the pinnacle of that. So I love Nesta.
Yeah, I do think, even though Nesta wasn't my era, I'll be honest, because I was born in like 1997, but like, a lot of people often they don't talk about Nesta, they only talk about Maldini. But to you, because you got to see both of them and you got to see a lot of games where they were together, obviously, and they were absolutely bossing it. Who do you think was the actual better defender objectively?
I think in terms of like the core basics of defending, I'd probably go with Nesta, maybe. But I think Maldini was probably the better all-round player. He was probably better with the ball at his feet. He was more comfortable bringing the ball out of more comfortable bringing the ball out from the back as well. And also, I think Maldini will always be slightly above him just because of those leadership sort of characteristics that he had, the fact he'd always lead from the front, and just generally sort of be the sort of the beating soul of that side, and never really looked too rushed either. But I think Nesta, it'd be interesting to see what Maldini would say. I think he'd probably say it was a lot closer than most people think. Right.
Yeah, you actually said that perfectly, because if you consider it, like, Maldini was a ball-playing defender in those days, and like, I think in today's day and age, I think his game would transcend very well, which is also another factor that you should look at, because if you look at Rio Ferdinand as well, that's why you get to respect such defenders over time way more. You get to appreciate them more because they were doing that back then. So when you look at that, and when you look at the fact that he's naturally right-footed, because I think he used to play as a right back, but then Mauro Tassotti came into the side, so he had to switch on the left and actually change his foot or something like that. When you consider all of that, I mean, it is pretty ridiculous. But in any case, they're two incredible defenders, one of the best to ever play the game. So anyway, moving on from Alejandro Nesta, who do you have at number 7?
Number 7, I'm going back to the Stadium of Light for Asamoah Gyan. Loved Asamoah Gyan. He was so much fun. He had a lot of quality. He obviously signed at just the right time. I think it was just after the 2010 World Cup where he sort of shot to prominence with Ghana. And he was a really underrated player. I think he kind of had a bit of it all, and just brought so much fun to the Stadium of Light, which is a club which we hadn't seen that sort of expression. Like, he'd have these great dance moves after, great celebrations, and for someone who was relatively young at that time, he just seemed like such a cool guy. And I remember we did a football social, our old show, which we used to shoot at Sky, which we'll hopefully be doing once the UK gets out of lockdown. And David Myler was on. He used to play for Sunderland and Hull, and now is at Coventry, I believe. Anyway, he was saying Asamoah Gyan was one of his favourite ever teammates because his energy was just so infectious. He just brought so much fun to the dressing room. And as a watching fan, I just thought he had a lot of quality as well. I just loved watching Asamoah Gyan.
Yeah, so, when you talk about Asamoah Gyan, as you mentioned, he's super underrated. Like, where do you rate him among the underrated African players in the league? Because everyone talks about the Salahs and the Yaya Toures and all of that. when you look at like lots of the underrated African players in this league, where do you rate him? Because I think on his day he was fantastic.
Yeah, he really was. I think the problem was, in terms of putting him amongst that sort of category of player, is that he just didn't do it for long enough in here. Like, he did leave for either Dubai or maybe Qatar, actually, which is fair enough. He'd come from a like impoverished background, wanted to ensure his family, you know, were looked after for the rest of their lives. I can see why you'd want to do it. At the same time, at the time it happened, I was pretty upset. But I think quality-wise, like, he was right up there. I mean, we saw it in that World Cup in 2010. Like, he was just like he was very good at holding onto the ball. He could bring others into the play. He was surprisingly quick. He'd never sort of shirk taking a free kick or a penalty or a big moment. And I think, he probably won't go down as, he might be around the sort of top 20 African players in Premier League history. I don't think he's like ready to break into like a Mahrez category or something like that. I'd probably put him just on Premier League career alone, somewhere around like Samuel Eto'o, who was probably a little bit underappreciated through his time at Chelsea and Everton, but obviously passed his best by the time he arrived there. So Asamoah Gyan definitely deserves a bit more credit.
Yeah, I still actually, when you mentioned Samuel Eto'o, I still remember that I think he scored a brace against United out of nowhere, which was just so strange. And he did that old man celebration.
Yeah, he loved that.
Yeah, so Samuel Eto'o is one of those. He's not quite a street phone forget player, but he's one of those players that you think about his career in the Premier League and you just have a laugh. So
absolutely.
Yeah, so Asamoah Gyan, as you mentioned, underrated, very, very underrated, and electric on his day. So but moving on from Gyan, who do you have at number 6?
Number 6 is probably a player that a lot of people would probably mention. I am going with David Silva. I just thought he was awesome. I think he was probably the best player in one of the best players, at least in the top 3 of the 2010s in the Premier League. In that, Lampard only played half fit, Gerrard only played half fit, Hazard maybe is in for a shout as well, Salah obviously if you do it in the last 3 or 4 years. But David Silva, for his consistency, the way players who sort of played with him talk about him, his movement, the way he could sort of control a game. And I feel like in the first at least 10, 11 games this season, we really saw the impact he had on how City looked without him. They call him like the tempo setter, and he's just got such a great understanding of when to speed play up, when to slow it down, how to pick a ball. And actually, through his first couple of years in his Premier League, was actually quite a frequent goal scorer as well. And I think only Christian Eriksen contributed more assists than him across his time in the Premier League, which is quite incredible. I don't think Eriksen probably gets the credit he deserves on that either. But David Silva, absolute legend. And what he went through off the pitch as well in his last couple of years, with his son being born very premature. And the fact that he was really the sort of player outside of the Barcelona and Real Madrid greats in that early 2010s period that consistently played for the national side. I'm going with David Silva.
I mean, I've never smiled this much during the interview, so that tells me I totally agree with this selection. I think Silva, to me, because people always talk about guys like Vincent Kompany and Sergio Aguero, but to me personally, Silva was our most important player during like our golden era, so to speak, where we actually started to dominate things in England, because I think he was the face of our style of play. He was the identity. He was the player through which everything actually went through. Where if you see Yaya Toure just running in a straight line, bulldozing past hundreds of defenders, that's because Silva might have found a free assist, or he just might have found space. And when you consider the fact that in the 2017-18 season, where we were the Centurions, when you consider the fact that was probably his best season or his second best season in a City shirt, despite being on the wrong side of 30, I think that tells you all you need to know. And he's absolutely balling in Sociedad as well.
Yeah,
so when
you really well, he's unstoppable, that guy.
Yeah, so and I'm really counting on him to put on an absolute masterclass against United, because that just has to happen. And I'm predicting Sociedad to go through anyway. That's no bias as well. Yeah.
Oh, it could be absolutely fascinating. I don't know whether their defense is ready for. I mean, Man United's attack, they do have a lot of attackers, and the style of play this year, it does leave them open at the back, and I think they're missing that number 6. But I think they could cause Sociedad some damage. But we'll see.
Yeah, I think it depends. I think it's going to be a tactical battle more than anything, because if you look at just quality-wise, United, to be fair, have a very good side. They're doing so well. Of course, the front three is amazing, and Bruno Fernandes is just ridiculous as well. So, I mean, I don't want to compliment them too much, but I'm counting on a Real Sociedad win. So, anyway, moving from the GOAT, David Silva, who do you have at number 5?
Number 5 is a player that I really have come to appreciate more, having watched highlights recently than at the time, because I just didn't watch that much European football growing up. I mainly focused on the Premier League, whereas now I try and sort of spread my interest around. But it's Zinedine Zidane.
Wow.
I just like love watching videos of him. I didn't actually watch that many full 90s outside of European Cups and sort of outside of the Euros and World Cups of him, just because I didn't watch a lot of like full games of like Champions League football in the early 2000s. But he's just what a player, and like his class on the ball. Again, probably not going to be appreciated as much as he should have in terms of his raw natural ability, because he never had the best goal scoring record, he never had the best assist record, but the way people talk about him, having played against him, you can just tell what sort of player he was. And that performance, which I always hark back to, France versus Brazil in the quarterfinals in 2006, when he was really on his last legs, and it was his final tournament. He was just absolutely insane, and for that tournament to be remembered for one moment of madness with that headbutt is such a crying shame for one of the best individual tournaments that I can remember, in at least since I've been watching World Cups. Like Zidane in 2006 was just a different animal.
Yeah, 2006 was my first ever World Cup, and I think he was incredible in that game against Brazil, as you mentioned. You know, as like everyone, I was a Brazil fan during that time because I wanted R9 and all those guys to win the World Cup. But he was electric. And you're right, like in this stats-based era especially, and there's nothing wrong with stats, of course, because they're a great barometer of how a player performs. But sometimes the eye test is very important, because you see those ridiculous takes on Twitter on how like Henry is not a big game player, or this person's not that. Like they'd make you believe that Paul Scholes, like your PE teacher is better than Paul Scholes. Like it's ridiculous on that app. So when you look at all those like crazy takes, I think someone like Zidane can also be thrown in there when it's absolutely false and baseless. So yeah, I think just watching Zidane, even when you watch the clips and you watch what he does, like you can't even delude yourself into thinking that, you know, I could do that one day. Like there's no way in hell you could ever do that. I think he's absolutely ridiculous, and I think he'll be in any top 5. I reckon he'll be in any top 5.
There's just a different level. I think the other player that probably doesn't show up in stats as well as they should is Iniesta as well. Similar sort of caliber of player, but just didn't have the numbers to go behind him, which often leads to him being criticised in this day and age. And I'm totally with you. I think stats have a purpose, but when it's the sole basis of your argument, I think it's not the one. I
mean, fun fact: Iniesta is my favorite player of all time. So
really,
because as I told you, I'm a big fan of Spain, and when I saw him in the, I saw him in his pomp, and that was when Spain were dominating everything. So Iniesta is my favorite player, but this is not my top 10, it's yours. So moving on from Zizou, who do you have as your, is it number 4 now? Yeah, I think it's number 4. Number 4.
Yeah, I'm going to weigh in on one of the biggest debates in English football of all time. I'm putting Steven Gerrard in at number 4.
Nice.
Not necessarily in that I think he was the better player than Lampard.
I was going to ask you. Who's the best for you? Gerrard, Lampard, Scholes. Who's the best for you?
I mean, it's a silly debate. They're all insane. But
I had to do it.
For me, I think Lampard was probably the best, then Gerrard, then Scholes. But that's just my personal preference. But I feel like Lampard, you can't really, like, he kind of redefined attacking midfielders in this country. We've never really seen it done before. His range of passing as well in the latter stage of his career was just awesome. But Steven Gerrard just made me feel more. I just enjoyed watching him play more. It was the sort of Captain Fantastic, I can do it all attitude. Went from that sort of rangy, surprisingly quick midfielder in his early days to sort of then, playing as that Torres link man in those Benitez days, and then sort of dropping deeper under Brendan Rodgers. And all 3 positions he just mastered, was one of the best in the league in it. And some phenomenal moments against West Ham, Olympiacos, scoring in a Champions League final. You just can't really top Gerrard's career in terms of big moments. Obviously, in terms of trophies, it's not quite there, at least compared to Scholes and Lampard, but I just loved watching Gerrard play. And also, one fact about Gerrard that I found really interesting, Jamie Carragher was saying on Sky the other day that actually at his peak, Gerrard was quicker than Michael Owen at his peak.
Wow.
Which is just insane. So a surprisingly quick player as well, and just had it all. I love Steven Gerrard. Yeah, number 4.
Yeah, so I mean, so do I, and I had to put in the whole Lampard, Scholes, and Gerrard debate, even though it's silly. I mean, because people, I think most people that actually love that debate, love talking about it, didn't actually see them live ever. And like the whole argument is based on stats. So like Scholes is like a nothing player to them. And like Gerrard, because Lampard scored like more goals than Gerrard, so he tends to win these debates, or Lampard gets the whole, oh, you had better players around you argument thrown at him. So
yeah, exactly.
Personally, go on.
Sorry, no, it definitely it's just personal preference. I think Scholes is a magnificent player. I actually think Roy Keane, Patrick Vieira deserve to be in this debate as well. Like there were so many great midfielders from that generation, and to put them in a ranking is just really difficult. But yeah, I think Lampard then Gerrard personally.
Yeah, exactly. Like my personal preference is Gerrard, Lampard, and Scholes. But yeah, again, they're three magnificent midfielders, so it doesn't really matter where you rank them. But I want to ask you a question. Partly because I'm a City fan and partly because he's ridiculous. But like, do you think KDB can, like, footballing wise, not legacy wise, outdo those guys? Because like whenever I see him week in, week out, and this is not like a bias, like it is very, very ridiculous to see what he's doing. Like he can literally do anything. He can defend, he can shoot, he can pass, he can cross. He's versatile. He played as a false nine against Chelsea, as you saw. So I mean, it really is something else. Like in my opinion, footballing wise only, not legacy wise, he can outdo David Silva personally, because what he's doing is something else. So what do you think about that?
Yeah, I think when he's been fit over the last 3 years, he's probably operated at a higher level than any of them ever did. In terms of his creativity, in terms of his work rate. I would say that he plays a slightly different position to at least Scholes and particularly Gerrard in the latter stage of his career. He gets a much more free role, which I think does help out his creativity. Also, Man City's ball dominance in that period, particularly between 17-18, 18-19. Like he did get an amazing platform to go and produce off. But at the same time, in terms of, you know, his impact on big games, in terms of his sort of talismanic figure, I think he's sort of already there in terms of Gerrard and Lampard. But in terms of greatest ever in the Premier League, obviously longevity is going to come into it, and trophies is going to come into it as well, sadly. And you know, if he signs that new contract, which has continued to being talked about, and stays for another 2-3 years, City might win at least another one Premier League title. I don't think they're out of it this year, to be totally honest. You know, who knows where KDB will end up, but I'm certainly enjoying the journey. He's definitely one of my favourite Premier League players to watch as it stands.
Yeah, absolutely. First of all, if he doesn't sign the contract, I'm flying to Manchester to make sure he does. But yeah, I mean, according to the negotiations at the minute, he's not happy with like the first offer that they gave him, but I don't think that will matter. I actually think he'll stay here till like, when I say here, I'm actually in Delhi. I'm talking as if I'm in Manchester. But I think he'll stay at City till like 2023, and then I think he'll go to the US. That's what I personally think. But I agree with you. Longevity is a massive factor, but I think ability-wise, he's right up there. But anyway, moving on from Steven Gerrard, who do you have at number 3? Now it's going to get real tasty, because now it's getting big.
Now it's getting very big. So I think a lot of people that heard that I'm a Sunderland fan will be surprised at this, but I'm going to put Kevin Phillips at number 3.
Wow.
Best ever Sunderland player, best player that I can remember in my era. But I was so young when he was operating, and he wasn't the reason that he hasn't given me the most joy out of all players watching him, because I was so young. Whereas reading about him now, I'm just like, this guy is insane. What a hero. The GOAT probably in Sunderland history. Unbelievable goal scorer. I mean, we already mentioned the fact he won the European Golden Boot playing for Sunderland under Peter Reid. Like he stepped up in big moments. His link-up play with Niall Quinn was phenomenal. He was just a deadly, deadly finisher. He was kind of like early years Michael Owen. And I just thought he was an absolutely awesome player. But there are 2 players that have made me enjoy football more, which is ultimately what it comes down to. It's how football makes you feel. So Sunderland fans might be slightly disappointed, but I've got Kevin Phillips at number 3, but phenomenal player.
Yeah, of course. I mean, I never got to saw him play, unfortunately. But, when you read about him, to score 30 goals for Sunderland that makes no sense. Like, what does that even mean? Because if you look at the state of the club now, not like obviously you can't equate it because it was much different back then, but still that's such a massive accomplishment. And but I think in your top 2, I assume Jack Rodwell's definitely going to have a place. Jermaine Defoe is going to have but your top 2 is going to be crazy, because you've picked some elite players, and I think what I like about your top 10 till now is the fact that you've picked like a range of players. So it's like current players and X players, and it's players that make you enjoy the game. That's the point. That's why it's more than a game. Shameless plug. So yeah, who are your top two?
Okay,
let's start with number two.
At two, I've got to admit, Srini, I've slightly cheated. I put two players at number two.
Okay, sure.
I couldn't pick between them.
Right.
One of them, we've just mentioned, Jermaine Defoe, was an absolute Sunderland hero. Couldn't look past him. Goals at crucial times, came back from Toronto, delivered for Sunderland consistently.
Right. Yeah.
And then he is tied with Ronaldinho, who was the first player that I really... He was the first player that made me feel like Messi does when I watch him now. And I haven't included Messi in my list. Spoiler alert, he's not at number one.
That's the title. Thank you very much.
That's the title. But I love Messi, but he's not one of my 10 favourite players of all time.
Right.
As in, he's easily the best I've ever seen, but he doesn't, I don't know. I've never related to him in the same way. But yeah, Ronaldinho was just everything for me when around that 2004-2006 period when I was first getting full on like gripped with football. He was by far the best player in the world. He was the most fun to watch, and his career arc was absolutely fascinating as well. You know, going in some really difficult times with injuries, with AC Milan, and then becoming a bit of a nomad in Brazil, then going to jail in Paraguay. Like he's one of those throwback players to a sort of George Best, Diego Maradona era where footballers have faults. Footballers are humans. Footballers make mistakes, and Ronaldinho sort of exemplified that. And yet, at his peak, he was, I think, easily the best player in the world for a 2-year period, and also one of the most fun players to watch of all time. So Ronaldinho is number two. Yeah.
I totally agree with you. I think Ronaldinho was probably my my first favorite player ever was Thierry Henry, and after that was like Raul, but after those two was Ronaldinho, because everyone makes the whole cliche, he used to smile on the pitch. Like, I'm not going to say that because I didn't notice that back then, but I will say that like he played with a certain joy, and he is who he wanted to become as a kid. And I think those kinds of players are very important if you actually want to fall in love with the game. So yeah, I think Ronaldinho was ridiculous. And Jermaine Defoe, I personally believe that he didn't get like a fair crack of the whip for England. I think that, especially when you look at how discombobulated most of the England sides were, I think Defoe should have got like more of a chance. His international record was actually very underrated. Whenever I used to see him, he used to do very well, and he's done so well for a multitude of clubs. I think recently he scored a ridiculous goal that went viral on Twitter as well. So yeah, Jermaine Defoe is excellent. Like, do you think he got a fair shot for England? I personally don't think so.
I don't think so, probably. But I think he was sort of limited by the fact that for a time with England, there was the idea that it was either sort of Crouch and Rooney or Owen and Rooney, and Defoe in his sort of real peak at sort of Spurs, and then back again when he had a look in around 2012 as well. There were players that were just maybe more in form at that particular moment. But if you look at consistency across his Premier League career, and his goal scoring for England was pretty good as well. But I think he is one of the most underrated Premier League players of all time. And lots of people don't agree with me and just think he was just a pure natural goal scorer. But he actually had far more to his game than that. And the way I always particularly remember him, and why it ramped him up my list even further, is the way he, sort of dealt with the Bradley Lowry situation, that very unfortunate boy called Bradley, who sadly passed away of leukemia, I think after like a 2-3 year battle. Jermaine Defoe was absolutely insane with him, and for a Sunderland fan to see one of your own go through that sort of thing and become such an emblem for the club, and the way Jermaine Defoe really got behind him and really supported him through the darkest days of his unfortunate very, very short life, like it really did mean a lot from a Sunderland perspective. So that's why he's above Kevin Phillips, who is a better player. But Jermaine Defoe, I just love Jermaine Defoe.
No, I totally agree. Actually, the whole Bradley Lowry thing is what sort of made me look at him like I looked at him more than a footballer then, because it wasn't a thing where he was doing it for like an image thing or something like that. Like, he was actually very invested, and he still talks about Bradley Lowry and on say like his death anniversary or something unfortunate like that. And I totally agree with you. I think he definitely is one of the most underrated, not just strikers, but players of all time in the Premier League. So yeah, 100%. But number one is definitely not Lionel Messi. And that's the guy. Why Dougie Critchley hates Lionel? I'm not going to do that. But who do you have at number one? I'm surprised you don't have Messi. I'm not surprised that you don't have him at number one, but I'm surprised that he didn't make the list at all.
Yeah, I like Messi a lot.
I don't
like
want to make
Messi
you
a
feel
lot.
guilty. I'm just saying.
I've never particularly related to him as a person.
Right.
In just his characteristics. There's nothing wrong with being a sort of quiet, shy, retiring, sort of quiet leader.
Right.
But I've just never really related to him. I've never really warmed to him. I love watching him play, but in terms of lots of the other players on this list, I also just didn't want to go through the top 10 best players of my era. I wanted to go through my favourite players in the era, which I think is very different. But I love him. I love Cristiano Ronaldo as well. Don't have an issue with him. Before we all start, because we get a lot of stick on Football Daily that we all hate Ronaldo. I don't hate Ronaldo. I think he's great.
I think that's because of sorry to interrupt you, but I think that's because of Pato, honestly.
Yeah, I think it might be, to be honest. I mean, there's a lot of people in the office who think Messi is by far better than Ronaldo, which is fine. You can have that opinion, but there's a few in the office who maybe harbour some I don't know, inbuilt resentment about him. I don't really know why. But anyway, my number one is Thierry Henry. He's already been mentioned.
Nice. Very,
it had to be. It had to be. I think he's one of, if not the best players I've ever watched. At his pomp, he was absolutely insane. That 3 or 4 year period from about 2002 to 2006, he was just absolutely awesome and so fun to watch. Like, effortlessly cool guy, incredibly quick, great finisher, just could do it all. And at a time when, you know, English football was really sort of emerging into the global force it is today, he was the sort of poster boy. And I don't think English football would be the same without Thierry Henry, to be totally honest. And
absolutely,
he was the fulcrum of one of the best sides I've seen in Premier League history, that Invincibles side. But even before then, the sort of 2-3 years before that, I think that Man United side against that Arsenal side, it was one of the best rivalries in Premier League history. And Thierry Henry was central to that. And I think was very unfortunate to not be closer to a Ballon d'Or in that period, to be totally honest. I mean, one season where he got 20 goals and 20 assists, like that shouldn't be allowed. So Thierry Henry, it's not probably the most niche suggestion at number one, but I just absolutely loved him. He's number one.
No, I mean, I couldn't agree with you more. I think Thierry Henry he had everything to his game. I mean, I don't even know what I can say about the guy. And when you hear how he talks about the game, like after he's retired, of course, you know, when you see the interviews, when you see how he gives advice to young players and everything like that, like he recently, not that Lewandowski's a young player, but when you saw that conversation, you see how involved he gets. Like, he doesn't give the typical answers that, you know, every footballer gives. So like when you consider everything, when you consider some of the teams he played in, I mean, he was perfect. He was just I don't think there were any problems in this game, personally.
I agree with you. And the way he talks about the game, I mean, I've got chills before when he's talked about that Barcelona side and his, like, recalling his Arsenal side. He makes the game sound so romantic. And I think it's probably the fact he's French. He's got this great accent. Always this epic player as well. I haven't heard an elite player talk about the game so effectively. At least in a sort of romantic way. I don't think he's necessarily like the most elite analytical pundit of all time, but the way he makes you feel about the game is just a different level. And he's just an absolute legend. I can't say anything more about him, really.
No, he was very boom, wasn't he? And now I have a suggestion for you, by the way. Like, after this, if you ever get free, I think you should watch this documentary where it's on Arsenal's YouTube channel, where like Henry is like talking through his Arsenal career and what it was like before he came to Arsenal. And I think you should consider that, because he talks about his childhood and everything like that. And it definitely will give you chills, because I think he talks about this moment where you know, when they won the league at White Hart Lane, I don't remember the name of the player, but like someone was like celebrating and like they were really overdoing it. And I think the referees told them before the game to, you know, calm down, to not celebrate in Spurs fans' faces, because, you know, it's going to get very rowdy and everything like that. And I think one of the Spurs players equalized, and he really went over the top. And Henry was like, I'm going to celebrate, because he was like, it's 2-2 and you're actually celebrating, like you haven't even won. And when you see like that look on his face, you're like, this guy's a real winner. So
absolutely, I've seen that plenty of times. I think I actually have seen that clip as well, and also underrated record for France as well.
Absolutely.
Obviously, unfortunately remembered from that handball moment.
Ireland,
so much abuse for that, perhaps unfairly. I think a lot of people would have done the same in that situation. It was kind of like a reflex. So I just feel like, his international record isn't talked about enough. And yes, he didn't have the best record in finals, but it wasn't just down to Henry. And I just feel like I completely agree with what you were saying earlier. Twitter is trying to make a mountain out of a molehill there. So Thierry Henry, untouchable for me.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, recently touching on this whole Twitter thing. Recently, I saw that apparently Kevin De Bruyne is a Poundland version of Bruno Fernandes. So there's that, right? So, I mean, football Twitter is the most ridiculous thing that you can ever. Yeah, I mean, you can't even make it up. So let's leave that behind. Honestly, it's embarrassing, to be honest. But yeah, Dougie, was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. Do you have any honorable mentions before we actually end the interview?
Oh, honorable mentions. Good shout. I mean, I think Xavi was epic. Loved watching Xavi. He's been a real sort of hero of mine throughout. He was sort of close to it. Okay. Who else was close to it? I mean, I loved watching Roberto Carlos in his peak as well. Yeah. He was a lot of fun. And then honorable mentions. I mean, just because
Iniesta maybe.
Iniesta as well, yeah. What he's done since he's left Sunderland as well. I think Jordan Henderson as well, heavily criticised for the last 5-6 years until about 2-3 years ago, and I think he's turned his career into the best it could have been for a very talented player, and doesn't probably get the credit. So Jordan Henderson would be in there as well, I think. Yeah, well, that's great, man. You made such a great top 10. I think it was a very varied list, as I mentioned. Obviously Jack Rodwell. I mean, Thierry Henry made it number one. I actually keep making that joke because of what he did in the documentary. I mean, you just can't make that up. I do not like Jack Rodwell. No.
Yeah, I mean, I'm a City fan, so he gave me a lot of false hope. I thought he was actually the next great English midfielder, but yeah.
You guys shouldn't complain. He was great for you guys compared to us.
I mean, the fact that I remember that he scored like a brace against Norwich in like some random game tells you all you need to know about his career. He was constantly injured, and that's pretty much it. So
it was a shame. It was a shame. I don't really like him as a person, but he did have a lot of talent in those Everton days, but just never produced it. But I don't have any sympathy for him. Yeah,
absolutely. But hey, man, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. I think your top 10 was excellent, as I mentioned. And yeah, as we were talking off camera, of course, we love football daily. A lot of my friends watch your videos as well, and you're one of the fan favorites, as I mentioned. You're the Aspilicueta of football daily. So yeah, it was an absolute pleasure having you on the show. And guys, of course, we are gonna have the links to football daily. The links are gonna be in the description below. I'm new to this, all right. So yeah, and there's also gonna be a link to the official More Than a Game website. So check that out. And yeah, subscribe, like, share, do all of that good stuff. Tell your friends about it, all of that. And yeah, I think that's about it. See you next time.